Everywhere I have sought peace and not found it, except in a corner with a book. Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. The quote of the week is from Thomas à Kempis, and this is actually a translation of a quote, the English translation. And so much in my life of late, I've been loving the concept of rest, the philosophy of rest, and the actuality of rest and rejuvenation and relaxation. So it's nice to bring that back into books. What an honor to have books for us to find peace and hide away for a little bit and take the focus off the realities around us, maybe the troubles, but maybe not that intense either, and just go into the books. And I'm not talking just the stories in books, but the audio, the production, the soothing memories that come along with people telling us stories when we were kids or people talking to us in soothing voices, and the environments that we can appreciate reading books in, around your home, the outside, resting at a beach, and the rest that we get with books through all of this, and especially with pleasure reading, is absolutely unmatched, right? This is not news. If you're a bookworm, then you and I know that it's absolutely true. Then we go and we crave that rest, and then we try to find it again in another book. What a lovely cycle. Let's get into the Sela homepage. There are 3 featured titles up there, a fresh, brand new batch. The first one is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jesse Q. Sutanto, and this is a mysteries and crime stories. The Climate Book by Greta Thunberg, and this is about the environment. And the last one up there is The White Lady by Jacqueline Winspire, and this is a historical fiction. So check those out at celalibrary.ca. And that is through the Center for Equitable Library Access. And we're going to have a fun chat with our friends from Sela in a second, and that is about book clubs. Where do you find your recommendations? And if it's through a book club, you're going to enjoy it. We're talking some recent book club picks, some celebrity book clubs, and, of course, what we think, all subjectivity here, what we think makes for a good book club recommendation. I think we're going to have a lot to say about all that with myself, Theresa Power, and Karen McKay from the Center for Equitable Library Access on AMI Audiobook Review. You're tuned into AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. I'm your host, Ramya Amudan, and it's time for our monthly Sela chat. That's got a ring to it. It's from the Center for Equitable Library Access, and we're joined by Karen McKay and Theresa Power from Sela. Theresa is the Content and Access Librarian. Karen is the Communications Manager, and you both join us at the start of the month being May, to talk about books. And we've been getting into some juicy subjects over the last couple of months. Today's topic is book clubs, the influence of book clubs. Are we part of book clubs? What are book clubs and what do they mean to us? And this can honestly take up a lot of discussion with all the different angles. But maybe we should start with the basic question. Do each of you currently actively participate in a book club? Theresa?
So I have a friend, a library friend, who started up a book club at the beginning of the year and asked me to participate. I did get the first book that they decided to do, which was the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
Yeah.
And that book was just, it wasn't my book. It wasn't, so I struggled. So am I part of a book club? It's a difficult question. Yes, but I may have given up a little bit after the first book. So that's kind of basically where I am with the book club.
Like still wondering if you should commit or not.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay.
The
Fair.
subsequent books that they've chosen haven't been fully up my alley
Mm.
either. So yeah.
In the past, have you been part of book clubs that you were fond of?
Not really as an adult, as a kid, definitely as part of the like library programming for sure. But not really as an adult, and especially not since going through library school and
Okay.
doing this professionally. Yeah.
Hey, maybe you're just a solo reader. You're like, I will recommend to myself. And I may or may not be happy with it, but then I can't blame the book club. So, Karen, how about you? Actively reading with people?
We're trying to restart a book club that sort of fell apart during COVID. So it should be a straight yes or no answer, but really it's not. It's sort of
Mm.
like Teresa's. I'd like to be, and we had a really great discussion group. But finding a time that works for everybody just seems to be really challenging post COVID. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's where I am with it.
What's interesting is that for some people, the book club is the huge impact that puts you into the headspace of reading, and it gives you this like minimal reading list of the year or a target to hit every month because you're doing it along with your friends, your people, the all the bookworms together, and that's awesome. But I feel like for the two of you who read so much so frequently, does it really matter? Like the purpose of the book club would be different, I should say.
So for me,
I
I'd
think
love a book club to talk about it, right? Like there are books
Sure.
that I read that I think I would really like to have somebody else's view on this. And the book club that I was involved in, we had really diverse thinkers, and we had one of the women was a professor of women's studies, so
Hmm.
she always had really interesting takes on sort of female characters moving through books. Um, and I did like that there was sort of like there was a deadline you have to read the book by, but I also kind of hated that because I have a rule that if I don't like the book by about page, I don't know, 50-ish, I'm done. Like there's
Oh, I
there's
don't think
not
we
enough
knew this
time in the
about you,
world.
Karen.
Yeah, there's not enough time in the world for me to read everything. Like I'll read books for work, but I don't always read them cover to cover. Like
Hmm.
sometimes I'll read them to get a gist of them and then let them be. But for personal reading, if you haven't got me by page 50, you're probably not. It's probably
Wow.
going in the giveaway pile.
This has
Yeah,
got to be the first time we've had that said
I
by you
know.
on the show. Okay. It's a very different picture of you as a librarian. No,
I'm
I'm kidding.
100% with you there on that.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't know. I just feel like my reading time is so precious.
Yeah.
I don't have enough time to read a book that I don't love, which is why I'm so particular about what I choose to read because there's so little time for me to read the things that I absolutely love. So, what I end up reading ends up being like, 100% what I love, hit it out of
Wow.
the park. Excellent, like a guaranteed enjoyment, basically.
The bar is high around the table,
Yeah.
actually, because I'm the same way. I have many unfinished books in my library, even, Audible credit worth books, just because if I can't get into it, I can't get into it. And I'm so easy, ready to move on to the next book that's going to take my attention. So that's very interesting, guys. Uh, how about book clubs to follow? So we're talking about our own personal belonging to book clubs and maybe lack thereof at the moment, but following the influence of celebrity book clubs out there, social media book talks, or just, big ones like the Oprah Book Club that are obviously very influential for a lot of people and influential in how big books get in general. Teresa, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of thoughts. I mean, my cynical side says, if you're following the Reese Witherspoon book club and you don't get around to the book, you'll probably just end up watching her adaptation of it eventually, which is
Right.
what she seems to do with many of the books that she chooses. But like, I think that those book clubs are really popular because of the kind of books that they choose. Like, they are not they're not extreme books in terms of their genres. I find them to be um, very middle, like in the middle. I don't know how to describe it better. It's not like this extreme science fiction or like this extreme western. There's something very kind of like middle ground about it, which I think makes those books that they choose far more appealing to far more people. There's more people that are going to pick up those kinds of books than books from like a book club where it's really, really niche.
Mm-hmm. Or personal, right? Like personal recommendations versus like
Mhm,
what
mhm,
is going to be a trend shortly
mhm,
because of this highly influential book club.
mhm. And I find that a lot of what Reese Witherspoon picks are more historical fiction in nature.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking there's a few in the top of my head. Certainly not all of them, but yeah, I think that there's a general appeal, and there's definitely I think a general readership that she's aiming for with her book club. Definitely the demographic there.
Right, right. Um, uh, Karen, for you, any positive feelings about these celebrity book clubs?
Well, I think that for both of those book clubs that you mentioned, Oprah and Reese Witherspoon's, they're the kind of books that you are likely to be able to talk over the fence with a neighbor about, right? They're the kind of books your
True.
neighbors would pick up, or your aunt might read, or your mom might read. And so I think that, that there's benefit in that because it creates a platform for folks to start talking about books with people they might otherwise not engage with on books, or it just gives some common ground, which I think we can all use more common ground these days. There's a couple of Reese Witherspoon books that, like, I was scanning the list for this conversation, and there was one or two I'm like, oh, I don't remember hearing about that one. It's an older book. I like that she picks sometimes some older books. Like Oprah seemed to be more current, like published within the last year or two for the most part. Whereas Reese, like her book for this month is, or last month, I think, is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. That's like a 7 or 8 year old book. And so, it's nice that you're not competing at the library necessarily to get them. And, I think that there's some well thought out parts of her book club. I do agree that most of her books look like the kind of things she would turn into a movie, but
Mm.
I'm not opposed to that either. I think Oprah's a bit more eclectic, and I think that she does, just by the nature of her view on the world, I think that she brings in a little bit more diversity into her book clubs. Certainly, the Black experience plays more prominently than I think it does in the Reese Witherspoon book. But what I also found interesting as part of sort of thinking about this is that there's lots of book clubs for women. I mean, these two are kind of default for women.
Yep.
So I went hunting around for book clubs for men. And a lot of them are online, or there's sort of chapters where they'll set up a structure and everybody, reads the same book. And there's a few, like there's a Tough Guys library or a Tough Guys book club, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then there's lots that have sort of connections through one dimension of diversity. So there was a lot of Black men's books clubs. There was quite a few LGBTQ plus community or gay men book clubs, which I think that's an interesting take on things, because you get a perspective that's probably similar to your own outlook. Not always, but you've got that sort of one thing in common. So I wonder
Yep.
what kind of conversations come out of book clubs like that, where there's there's a common thread versus something that's maybe a little bit more diverse. Like my sister-in-law's in a book club, and they've had lots of sort of people come and go, but the same group's been together for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they have, like, there's a couple of people in her book club that she would never run across in any other circumstance in her life.
Mm.
And she finds that really interesting and really engaging to have those different perspectives. And so, back to the Reese Witherspoon and Oprah, I think it gets people reading, which is always a fantastic thing. But I wonder um, how much sort of depth of conversation
Mhm.
some of these book clubs create.
Yeah, and I can empathize with what you said about Oprah specifically. I think that she's a fascinating person and that she's got so much to share on her views, her perspectives, her lived experience, even. And then obviously her ladder up the entertainment industry. And so when she recommends a book, I feel like it comes from a very deep place. It may not always be the case. Maybe it's just presented that well and that way. But I feel connected to what she has to say through taking her recommendation. And And because of that, and maybe others have very similar perspectives, that could influence you taking a recommendation, similar to wanting to read something a friend is reading, right?
Mm.
Because it feels more meaningful to you than just, oh my gosh, it's getting so popular. It's on Oprah's book club. So that's one thing. And then the second thing you said about people meeting each other who wouldn't necessarily meet in other circumstances, or vice versa, where you're building a community around this common thread of, um, we all have this in common, are, I think, lovely, wonderful ways to bring people together to read. Because then when you read, there's so much more expansion to the kinds of things you can talk about and to get to know each other in different ways. But it's very true. Like even with the book club, Amir's book club, Amir, who joins us on the show, in that book club, it's pretty local. Like most of us are from the Greater Toronto area, and most of us are from the blind low vision community, and yet there are people who I don't necessarily hang out with on a regular basis or see in circumstances aside from this book club. So when you said that, it kind of hit home for me as well, thinking that's true. But the interesting conversations we have around the books we read are always so engaging and so fascinating. What makes you guys both touched on this in different capacities already, but what do you think, either objectively or super personally, makes for a good book club recommendations? Um, I've been part of different scenarios where we're trying to figure this out, legitimately say, is there a formula for this? Should we try this trial and error? Or do we just go around the table and every month somebody picks something that they want, no questions asked? Is there something around that you've tapped into, Teresa?
I think a lot of it really depends on the people who are part of the book club, and like what kind of book club you want to have. If you are a group of people who are there and are really flexible and really just love the social aspect of it, and want to read anything for the sake of being able to come together and discuss it, then I think that gives you a lot of flexibility to pick and choose what you want. For me, when I think of book club, I am kind of I naturally go to the quintessential kind of book club, which is the Oprah book club or the Reese Witherspoon book club. There's one book that I read recently called Vera Wang's. Um, sorry, excuse me. Oh gosh. Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. And, I read this book and it was very much a gentle mystery. There wasn't a lot of gore to it, but there's a lot of humor to it as well. It's a fairly easy read. Um, and I think that it would be kind of fun to discuss that, but it's not juicy in terms of the discussion points at all. But I also don't know when people read Oprah Book Club books or Reese Witherspoon book clubs, as a club, are they going somewhere online as a whole group? Are people meeting together in subgroups and discussing these books? I wasn't too sure. But I thought as a kind of middle ground book, this would be a fun and interesting read, and one that I would recommend, say, to like a library to use as a book club book.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So not just like a recommendation necessarily, but also beyond that to say this could be a general recommendation for any kind of book club.
Yeah, I think so. If
Mm.
you're a book club where you're reading all different kinds of things, and also it depends on like the demographic of your book club. I think this would be like the quintessential kind of
Mm-hmm.
book club book that you would have in a library.
Okay, that's fair. I'm not gonna lie. I've very narrowly been focused on personal recommendations and
Mhm.
how this book, why this book is being recommended by you. Like I
Hmm.
love that connection. But truly, yeah, what makes for a good book club pick? Any thoughts from you, Karen?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about this. With my book club, I really love when we get into deep conversations where we can sort of pick up an issue and look at it from all sides, because everybody's got some different perspectives
Mm-hmm.
to offer. We read An Inconvenient Indian. This was a few years ago now, and I have to say our conversation wasn't great. Like, we all sort of learned things, but we often really agreed on the things that we were learning, and there wasn't a lot of sort of debate. So it was a more educational kind of experience, but not a good discussion, if that makes sense. Whereas other books, like there's a book right now. It's on I believe it's on Oprah's list. It's called Hold My Girl by Charlene Carr, and it's about two women who have IVF and their eggs get switched, and one woman has a stillborn and the other woman has a live baby, and then they
Oh
figure
my.
out what's happened. And so I haven't read this book; it's new out this year, just in the last couple of months, I think. But I could see that with the book club that I've been involved in. I could see us having some really interesting conversations about motherhood and connection, and what's the right thing to do for the child, and identity, and like just all of these different nuanced things. Whereas if we're reading a book that we can't sort of argue with each other about it, the conversation doesn't seem quite as rich in my experience. So there's another book that I think it could be a really good book club book. It's called Valley of the Birdtail. It's currently on the Shaughnessy Cohen book list, and it's written by two men, one who's Indigenous, and it's on the BC coast, I believe, and the other who's white, and they grow up in this town that's separated by a river, and so they've got the reserve side and you've got the white side, basically, and their differences and experiences. I think that'd be an enlightening book. I don't know that it would be like, I think we'd all come to the same kind of conclusions around that book. So I don't know that it would be as juicy a discussion as one where we can kind of really dig into the issue.
Yeah.
That's sort of my take on it.
When I think about a book, like if I was going to recommend a book that was really great for a discussion, I think On the Ravine by Vincent Lam would probably be at the top of my recommendations. It's about two Chinese doctors set in Toronto, and these two doctors are approaching the problem of overdosing, and that epidemic, from two very different kind of places and perspectives. And it's actually the third book of, I don't know if it's a planned trilogy or an unplanned trilogy, but it follows two characters that actually appeared in his very first book, Bloodletting and Other Miraculous Cures. And each book kind of follows different characters, and it's so topical right now. Um, and I think that it would probably provide a lot of fulsome discussion at a book club. And it's also one that I'm really looking forward to reading myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many reasons to get together as we've laid out through this convo, to talk books, and the discussion is obviously the main bit. Everybody comes in with not just their discussion points and their takeaways from, but also their listening ears, and being able to take in feedback and review and perspectives from others who've read. And I think that that is such a big part of the learning experience through having these um, communal book discussions. But then also, the reasons why we get together, right? With virtual book clubs, which is the only thing that I've ever had the opportunity to take part in. You're really just discussing, maybe over dinner, so you're having your own food. But I would love to be in a space with people discussing over actual food together. And so that's kind of my next step towards a book club. And that would be really
I've done
nice.
that
Yeah?
actually. Yes, Bonnie Stern, who is a local Toronto chef, pre-pandemic had a great book club where you read a book and then you went to a dinner that was kind of based on that book. And I
Oh
read a book
my.
set during like the Tsar times in Russia, and it was really great. We went to Jamie Kennedy's old restaurant, which was on the east end of Toronto, now closed. And he served this like sumptuous meal with like
Oh my.
borscht, and it was really out of this world and totally up my alley because I also love food.
Yeah, that would have taken the discussion to another level. Oh my gosh, count me in. See, and now we're post pandemic, so I'm really going to have to step it up with this game plan. Theresa, Karen, thank you so much for joining us, as always.
Our pleasure.
Karen McKay, Theresa Power from the Center for Equitable Library Access. You can catch them back around at the start of every month here on AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Ramya Amadin, with technical producer Nisreen Abdel-Majid for the show. We're getting into another Know Your Narrator segment with Sarah Hillis next time. And until then, happy audiobook listening.